Erev Tov. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at Or Shalom for this very important talk. I'm Rabbi Hannah Dresner, and just by way of housekeeping, I want to say that we have a washroom around the corner, just out this door and around the corner. I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. We are so grateful to be working and praying on what is already holy ground. The land that this sanctuary stands on has been sacred space for our indigenous peoples for over 10,000 years. By way of introduction, I don't want to presume that I know why you all are here, but I'll just say why I'm here. I'm here because I'm feeling grief and a desire to be of service. It makes me so very sad to watch threat to Israeli democracy. And more than that, I think it's an important time for me to acknowledge that the democracy that I imagine as part of that beautiful place that I called Israel through my whole growing up and adulthood is really a selective democracy, a democracy for some and not for all. So that is a very important aspect of my concern at the moment, is not just what happens with the loss of democracy, but what is that democracy and how can it be a democracy that serves all who live in the land of Israel. So with that, I want to turn our program to Ben Moraine, who is the Executive Director of the Canadian New Israel Fund, and allow Ben to make subsequent introductions. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank, I just want to thank Amenu for being our co-hosts of this event, and of course to express my gratitude to our Tikkun Olam committee, who has done all of the logistical work to make this possible. Michal Fox and Mary Adlersberg and Maxine Lacosta and Jane Heyman and Alexis Kellum-Creer and Malcolm Steinberg. Am I missing anyone? Okay. And Avril Orloff. Thank you so much.
Hello. So for those of you who didn't see the gesture, Ben has turned it over to me, but you will be seeing more of him very shortly. So hi, everyone. It's nice to see everyone's faces. Hi. Yes, I've already met one person, very friendly. So my name is Polly Tadoff, and I'm one of the New Israel Fund of Canada Noemi Chazan Fellows. The fellowship just started in January, so I am fresh on the scene. Thank you all for joining us tonight to learn more about what's happening in Israel today, how we got here, and what we can do about it. We are grateful to be presenting this event in partnership with our friends at Or Shalom and for the support of Canadian Friends of Peace Now and Amenu Canada, who are co-sponsoring this program. I hope that many of you are here for the reasons that also brought me here tonight. That is, a deeply rooted connection to Israeli society underscored by a commitment to liberal and progressive values. The same things I wish for Canada, I also wish for Israel. That is, prosperity, safety, equal rights for all citizens, freedom to marry the person you love, protections from the most marginalized and vulnerable, and an economy that leaves no one behind. Unfortunately, that vision is under tremendous threat in Israel right now. With the election of the new extremist government, numerous attempts at radically altering Israeli society and governance, including drastic changes to legislation, are afoot. Prior to joining NIFC as a fellow, I was unsure whether I had a place at the table when it came to discussing, let alone taking action on issues related to human rights, democracy, and governance in Israel. After all, I have never lived in Israel and do not even speak the language. However, NIFC leadership and activists like Lihi, who you'll hear from momentarily, whose work NIF supports on the ground, have convinced me otherwise. The truth is, the influence that we have on Israeli government and society as Jews living in the diaspora cannot be overemphasized. Like me, you may find yourself asking, what is happening? Is Israeli democracy really under threat? How did this situation come to pass? What is being done by Israelis in response? And what can we do from here, all the way in Canada? These questions are not new to the New Israel Fund. For 40 years, the New Israel Fund has been funding and bolstering the presence of Israeli social change activists and grassroots organizations that have fought and won Israel's struggles for a better, fairer, more equitable nation. In the words of one of Israel's most widely read daily newspapers, Haaretz, there is hardly any significant, socially oriented organization in Israel today that does not owe its existence to the New Israel Fund. We're here in Vancouver on this cross-country emergency tour because it's critically important for Israelis fighting for democracy and equality that they receive support from the diaspora community. But it's also imperative for us as diaspora Jews to understand that this is a long-term struggle for the essence of Israeli society. And it's forcing us to reshape how we see Israel, how we engage with Israel, and lastly, how we support Israel. To lead this conversation tonight, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers, Ben Moraine and Lihi Shmuely. They'll share their analyses of the present situation and afterwards address any questions you may have. Afterwards, we hope you will join us for light refreshments and continued conversation on the issues presented this evening. So, to my right here, we have Ben Moraine, the Executive Director of the New Israel Fund of Canada and a leading voice of millennial engagement with Israel. For over 15 years, Ben has led at the intersection of Jewish life, social justice, and Israel. He previously worked for NIF's US branch, won Jewish Innovation Awards for his work in environmentalism and campus life, and founded both online and offline Jewish communities. In 2012, he received the prestigious Dorot Leadership Fellowship in Israel, where he studied comparative nationalism and consulted for social action groups. He currently lives in Toronto with his wife and 2 young children. Then we have here, on your left, on the screen, Lihi Shmuely, who is the Deputy Director of Israel Hofsheet, advocating for policy change on issues of religion and state in Israel. Lihi has been working at Israel Hofsheet for the past 3 years and previously was the Director of Training and Community. Before joining Israel Hofsheet, Lihi led international programs in developing communities at the Arab Jewish Center for Empowerment, Equality, and Cooperation at the Negev Institute for Strategies of Peace and Economic Development. She was also the coordinator for the Partnership Together Leadership Program as part of the Montreal Be'er Sheva Partnership at the Jewish Agency and was a community emissary in the Jewish Federation of Columbus, Ohio. Lihi holds a master's in public policy and BA in political science from Ben-Gurion University, as well as a certificate in international development and humanitarian aid from IDC Herzliya. Lihi lives in Tel Aviv and is proudly married to Noah. All right. So without any further ado, take it away.
Thank you, Polly. Thank you, Rabbi Dresner. Thank you to Or Shalom for hosting us again. Second time in 9 months. We're really proud of the deep bonds between this community and the New Israel Fund. Even though our community in Vancouver extends broadly and widely, it's really nice to have we have a bit of a home here. Obviously, Lihi thought she would be here in person. But after avoiding COVID in Israel for 3 straight years, it caught her up to her in Toronto. So Lihi broadcasts with us live from her hotel room in Toronto. It's very unfortunate that she couldn't make it out with us in person, but we're really glad that the community still felt that it was worthwhile to do this event, and I'm really pleased to be here and to see many of you in person. How are you feeling, Lihi?
Much better, thank you. Thank you. Sorry for not being able to be with you there in Vancouver tonight, but thank you so much for coming.
When we first organized this event, this tour, through Montreal and Ottawa and Toronto and Vancouver, a little over a month ago, We thought the task in front of us would be to raise the issues and to force it onto the community agenda, and to use our, our visiting speakers and our presence as a way of doing that. A lot has changed in the past month. And I would say a lot has changed in ways for the better. And I will unpack why, but I think we couldn't have anticipated that every Saturday there would be 100,000 protesters coming out, 300,000 at the last weekend. We couldn't have anticipated that the economists and the businesses and the bankers would be also mobilizing. We did not anticipate that the security officials would be coming out and signing. It's very ironic to have a very long list of anonymous signers, but it's a thing that has to happen in Israel for high-level security officials, that they would also be signing statements in greater numbers than ever before. That the high-tech businesses would be giving their employees the days off to go demonstrate. That the heads of Israel's major universities would be signing letters about the dangers of the course override initiatives. That the lawyers and the Bar Association and the Press Council and all of the major pieces of Israeli society would be getting off the fence and mobilizing and coming out. We couldn't have anticipated that in the past few weeks that major diaspora voices who, between you and me, are usually the ones arguing against criticism of Israel, would be coming out saying, please criticize the government of Israel. This is like quite a remarkable, it's strange to keep reusing the word unprecedented after going through COVID, but it's true. It is an unprecedented moment in like Israel and the Israel diaspora relationship. The Jewish Federations of North America issued a very surprising and precedent-breaking statement against the court override. You see individuals like Erwin Kotler coming out. You see Abraham Foxman, and for whatever it's worth, Alan Dershowitz also saying something, for whatever that's worth. The letter of Canadian jurists and retired judges and law professors, which numbered 70 when it came out and now has hit 150. I don't think we need to do as much of is Israeli democracy really under threat, and let us explain to you why. I think the point has been made. We're here because if you have questions, then we want to be able to answer them. But at least Lihi and I no longer have to do, I think, the heavy lifting in that case. What we would like to do with you this evening is Lihi and I would like to give you a tour to unpack for you some of the opposition that's happening. And we want to give you our analysis of what are our odds for success on some of these things. And there's the short-term pieces of that, and there are long-term pieces of that. Because I think the reality is that this is not going to be a genie that you can put back in the bottle easily. We're looking at a long-term work in front of us. And so I think it's the most important thing we can do is give you the sense that all is not lost, that the stakes are high, but that actually there is something you can do. There's something that Israelis are doing, and you can help them, and that there's some things that you can do here also that will make change on the ground in the community here where we live. So that's what we would like to do with our evening together. Lihi and I will sort of walk through some of the major issues, and then we'd like to open it up for questions. And then I can't promise that we'll get to all the questions, but you're welcome to join myself and others downstairs for coffee and wine and light refreshments afterwards, so that we can continue discussing and I can answer any other questions you might have. I just before we dive in, I actually want to ask people, get a sense from you as well as all of our viewers, our participants online, maybe how closely you've been paying attention to the issues. So I'd love you to raise your hands. I'd love to know if you have been, let's say over the past month or so, very closely watching what's been going on. I see people raising 2 hands and 2 legs. I see a lot of people online. Lihi, I think they can raise their virtual hands, they can raise their actual hands. There's lots of ways that they can do it. I think it's really important to see how, what people are.
See, more and more hands are raising.
More hands than not.
Yeah.
Okay, but for those who are like just now tuning in, how many of you are like only recently or only a little bit been following the events in Israel? Okay, so a couple brave people admitted, a couple more. I won't tell Linda. And online, people you can, give us some signal, like just now really beginning to tune in, or have only been following things lately.
We have a nice mix.
A nice mix, okay. For those who, regardless of whether you're super familiar with stuff or you're only tuning in now, how many people are very worried about what's going on? 2 hands and 2 feet again. Yeah, like even the people who are just tuning in now, it seems like really disturbing stuff. And online, Lihi, what's our response?
It seems like everyone or extremely.
Everyone, okay, yeah. It's okay to be honest. Is there anybody for whom, like, not quite sure if this is so worrying yet? Or not totally convinced? In person, no hands. Lihi, anybody online?
A little bit.
A little bit, okay, all right. Like I said, I think the moment that we're in is that the case has been made for us by what's happening out of Israel, and the many people that are sort of speaking up and being visible in this moment. So but I think it's probably worth asking, it's worth asking the question anyway. Lihi, is this really Israel democracy under threat? Is this, really as big as everyone says it is, or is this just some kind of political squabble? Like sort of the same as we've seen over the past few years or decade or so. What do you think?
Our regular basis is a political scrabble. So I think I'll start with introducing myself. So I think it would also give us a bit of a context to why we're here
Please do.
today. So I think if I'm trying to best explain who I am and where I come from, I would try to describe you the same scene you would find in the Shmuely's house every Yom Kippur. And I swear to God, for over 30 years, the same scene over and over. You would have on one side of the table my mother, who comes from a Mizrahi, Masorti, very traditional, religious, right-wing, conservative family. And she's fasting. And on the other side of the table, you have my father, who comes from a very liberal, secular, Holocaust survivors, left-wing voters family, and he's eating his ham and cheese sandwich. And this is how Yom Kippur looks at our house. And in the middle, you would see my brothers and I. And the thing is, and I think it's something that only later in my life I realized how much influence it had on who I am. There was room for all of us. There was room for those who are fasting and those who are not. There was room for who you are, wherever your background is. And I think, my parents might have a lot of disagreement and a lot of things that they see differently. But when it comes to the freedom to choose, as simply as that, freedom to choose who you are, I feel like this is probably the strongest common ground they have and strongest share of value they have. And so this is the family I grew up in. And I think this is probably the best representation of who I am today. It was about 6 years ago when I told my parents that I'm not so sure what I am, but I think I have a girlfriend. So my mother started crying a lot. My father went to the kitchen to bring alak so we can raise a toast. So yeah, they're that different. But for the rest of that night, my mother and I spent talking And she was crying and mourning. And she said, I'm scared. It's hard enough to be a woman in this conservative country. So let alone that there would be two of you. And how would you live your life? And how would you have a family? And what kind of equality would you have in this country? And I was really trying to reassure her. I was really trying to tell her that we live in a liberal country and we will be just fine. We will have a family. We will be equals. We will not be tagged as different. At the time, I was pretty confident in what I'm telling her. And I think that today I'm not as confident as I was. I think that today, I'm trying to be brave for her, but I'm very scared for the future of my country. And so back to your question, Ben, I think that yes, make a long story short, the answer is absolutely yes. I'm just saying I'm not ADHD, but I do think that I am. So if I need to read a comment at the same time, know that I will see that only afterwards. The important thing to understand is that we did not move backwards. It's not like, okay, Israel already had a right-wing government, and now we have, after 1 year or 1.5 years of a changed government, and now we have a right-wing government again. This is different. This is completely new to us. This is a very extreme, radical government that we've never seen before. And I think you mentioned that, Ben, it's really enough just to see the people in the streets on those demonstrations to sort of get the sense of the urgency, because you will see in wherever you'll go for the demonstration, you will see people that did not use to not even go to demonstration, but did not define themselves as they used to say, we're not political. I don't get involved with that. I don't want to be engaged with that. Like, I separate my life from politics. And people understand that these days, sitting on the fence is as harmful as supporting this government. And you will see more and more people, and I'm telling you, even personally from friends and family, that for years, I've been working for nonprofits my whole life, and I was trying to encourage them to be involved, and everyone, no, it's not for me. It's not. And now people understand that we don't have this privilege anymore to say, I will not get involved. And I think this is because these are issues that are within the core of the Israeli society. These are issues that are questioning our identity. I feel like we're asking ourselves, what are we? Are we Jewish state? Are we a democratic state? Are we a liberal democracy? Is there a contradiction between all of them? How does it supposed to work? And it feels like these days we are writing the rest of our history. And it sort of feels like we got to a point, we were writing and it got to a point in a sentence that we're not so sure what would be the next word. And I think that is first terrifying. And second, it is an opportunity to make the right choice, the way I see it. And you would say that this is not anymore for a while now. it's not a left or right situation. It's not an issue that concerns two specific parties. It's something that is relevant, and it's an issue to the entire Jewish people. And you know, just even look at Israel Hofsheet, for example. We work in the field of religious freedom in Israel. Okay, and even us, for many things that we wouldn't usually get involved with, we do. In the past few months, we find ourselves getting involved with things that we didn't usually get involved with, because we understand that we must, and we don't want to look back and say we should have. This is definitely the time, and I think honestly, my grandmother, as I said, she's a Holocaust survivor, and she keeps saying, like in the past few months, that this is not the country she ran away from Europe for. And I feel such a strong commitment and responsibility and obligation to make this country a better place and you know, protect it. So yeah, I do think we're under a terrible threat, and I do think that it's not too late. It's almost, but it's not yet. We still have a lot to do.
Well, let's let's go back to what you said a little bit ago when you were talking with your mom, that you said, "Mom, it's a very liberal country. We'll be okay." And your mom said, it's a very conservative country. I'm very worried. And I think we see at the moment that it's both. This is a struggle for the soul of Israel. It's not about one politician, and it's not about one election or even 5 elections. It's not about one political party. This is something that's much, much bigger. It was already a decade ago when the New Israel Fund, in our work taking care of civil society and growing and nurturing grassroots progressive change makers, noticed the telltale signs of populist illiberalism. That many of the initiatives that are live in the Knesset today have been attempted and suggested and tabled as legislation and brought forth in committees and advocated by right-wing forces in Israel, plainly and out in the open for decades already. And perhaps previously no one had the belief that they would advance too far, but it's been very obvious to us that something is shifting in Israeli society. The good thing is that there are good things shifting in Israeli society, and there are bad things shifting in Israeli society. And the question is, can we fuel the good things? Can we give them root over the long term? So why don't we get into some of the short-term things, and then we'll get into some of the long-term things. When we're looking at, when we take a step back, we look at this moment that we're in. What is it that civil society can achieve in a moment like this? When you have a government that is, has just enough seats to be a majority, but they have all the power they need in order to make these sweeping changes. So what can you practically do in those moments? What we see civil society is excellent at, and what can do, and what it needs to be doing in this moment, is what we see happening in Israel, is that civil society groups can mobilize immediately to protect specific vulnerable minorities. That there are all kinds of ways that we'll get into that you can protect people's actual rights and protect their livelihoods and protect their bodies in these moments. Just thinking about the violence we saw over the past couple days. What can we do in those moments? Another major plank is civil society civil society can protect dissent if we do not protect the right of protest and demonstration and dissent for the broader public, then again, we've lost one of the pillars of democracy. So protecting the right and the permissions of dissent is actually really key and crucial, especially in moments when we see like the enforcers of the protection of people's right to dissent is governed by Itamar Ben-Gvir. In such a moment, he's the minister of the police. He has a conviction for incitement to racism. So I think we're naturally a little bit skeptical about the likelihood that his police force will treat all protesters equally between right and left or between Jewish and Arab. But even bigger than that, I think there's something we can see that civil society also has a major role in just simply building the movement right now. With all of these new groups coming off the fence, with all of these sectors of society mobilizing, there's a question of like, will they make a big protest and it'll fizzle and that'll be the end of it? Or will it be converted and channeled and coordinated with other bodies, and will they grow into something of greater impact? There's something in there about new and untested civil society actors and veteran, experienced, seasoned civil society actors and how they work together. And that's why in this particular moment, I think one of the most important things that the New Israel Fund is seen as necessary is actually a great deal of new funding for emergency grants. And we'll get into that, but the idea is simply that this is a lot of extra new work. It's a ton of new initiatives, like all these different groups that are cropping up to help oppose things. Who's gonna fuel them? Who's gonna train them? Who's gonna support them? So I think when we're looking at the short term, we'll get to the long term in a minute, but there's pieces of protecting people's actual rights. There's protecting the ability to dissent for what outside the government. And then there's also, what are we doing to connect the movement? So, I mean, Lihi, when you're doing, in this moment, you're an organization, Israel Hofsheet is Israel's leading grassroots advocacy group for religious freedom. So, just to tell a short story, just to toot Lihi's horn for her, a decade ago, Israel Hofsheet didn't exist, but now they have 160,000 activists that do like rapid grassroots mobilization to fight incidents, to fight for religious freedom. And that's like a grassroots power, which didn't exist a decade ago. So, if you have those kinds of resources, if you have that kind of a base, what can you actually do in these moments under this kind of a government? What's like reasonable to accomplish?
First of all, I think a lot. I think that this is part of it. We should not be waiting to see what would happen, right? So people said, oh, they didn't mind to do what they said they will do, and then they wrote it in coalition agreements. Oh, no, they don't mean it. It just be in the coalition agreements that it will not happen. Oh, no, they're just passing the legislation. Oh, no, but they don't mean it. Just, if it if it sounds like a duck. The thing is, I think that this is a very slippery slope. And this is our responsibility to stop it as soon as possible and as fast as we can, because we're reaching to the point that it's almost too late. And I think that if you look, if we'll take Roe versus Wade, okay, for example, no one would have thought that this is something that might change, right? We thought this is already set in stone, like the Supreme Court has decided, and that's it. And I think that for many people, to see this overruling, it's sort of, I think for us, it's shaking the boat a little bit, because it's a moment that makes you understand that they do mean what they say. They will do what they say they'll do. And so we need to take it very, very seriously. In Israel, I think we have a very good opportunity for pushback. First, in the municipal level, I don't know if you're aware, but we have a municipal election in the coming October. And unlike our national elections, we only have those once in 5 years. So this is stability at its best. And the municipalities in Israel are, I think, in looking in this situation now, is sort of like the midterms in the States. Like this is our chance to show this this pushback. The municipalities in Israel do have a lot of power, and we've been working for the past 5 years with the municipalities to create a very strong network of liberal municipal council members who work together across the country from different municipalities to sort of create a change. You know, it's sort of a grassroots change when you look at that comparing to the national level. So if you just, you know, if let's take for example the public transportation on Shabbat, okay, which again, Israel Hofsheet perspective on that is first of all a basic civil right to, I don't know, visit my grandmother if I cannot afford to have a car, right? That only makes sense. And okay, so the national, if we're looking at that in the national level, we know that we will not have that anytime soon as we did so far. But municipalities understand that they do have the power, and they do understand that their constituents that who are about to be the voters in a few months do want that. So they decided to put the money for it and subsidize it. And so specific municipalities now have public transportation on Shabbat. It's amazing on the one hand. On the other hand, I think there's a huge problem with that because it means that only municipalities that can afford that can have that for their citizens. And I think this is a whole different problem that we need to address. And this is why I think this is not a satisfying solution, and it's not the end of it. Or you can look at, let's say you're registering your kid for school, right? And you need to sign, the parents need to sign at the forms, right? They need to sign at the end of the forms. And up until it was less than 2 years now, the forms said mother and father. Okay, these were the national forms from the Ministry of Education. And then municipalities decided they want to change it for parent 1, parent 2. And they did. And it sounds now it sounds almost ridiculous, right? Because why didn't do it before? But it's something that took a long time, and it took a lot of work to strengthen a leadership that would come forward and do that. So I think a big part of our work should be strengthening these forces within the communities, strengthening this leadership. Another thing that we do in the short term that I think is crucial is we're very responsive to what is happening, and a lot is happening. We stay very busy. And you would see examples. I don't know, are you familiar with the name Avi Maoz? Please raise your hand or nod.
Yeah. If you're familiar with Avi Maoz, the name, okay, like, you know, a few hands, very sheepishly, people aren't
Okay,
totally
okay.
sure they wanna...
How should I sum it up? The racist, homophobe, chauvinist, all of the
He's
above.
the Israeli minister that is like the homophobe. Like there's a lot that are homophobic, but like there's the one.
Said he was proud to be attached to
No, that was the second one. But yeah, so in the
Plenty to
reporting,
choose from. So yeah, so a few years ago, that person would be, not even a few years ago, right? He will go like a year or two back. That person would be considered to be an extremist who does not have any legitimacy to the way he speaks publicly. But today, he is a minister in the Prime Minister's office, which is lovely. And he said just a few months ago that, I love that, it's so ridiculous. The only contribution that women can have for the country is to get married and have kids. Take a moment to observe that. 2023, this is a minister at the Prime Minister's office. And we initiated a campaign. We have in Israel Hofsheet, we have Havaya. It's an Israeli life cycle ceremony when we marry couples outside of the Rabbanut, and we do both the ceremonial part and the legal part, work with them. And we have over 60 officiators, men, women, from all kinds of. Rina, you're right. He did resign, but he's still a member of Knesset, and he will continue to promote his legislation. So, not such a great news as we hope.
Just, I think Lee's commenting, someone made a comment in the chat that just in the past 24 hours, 48 hours, he resigned from his post, but he's still in the government. So
It's
it's
still promoting his legislation.
very symbolic in nature.
By the way, I do think it's a process. It's a product of the protests. But this is talking about the short term. I do think it comes from a lot of work of saying that this is not a person that should decide what our kids will learn to school. He's not a person to decide whether couples should or not, gay couples should not have kids. He's not like, this is not a person that should have any authorities in this country. So anyway, Avi Maoz, women can only contribute by getting married and having kids. And so we initiated a campaign saying, okay, so if this is what Avi Maoz say, we will marry women couples for free in Havaya. And, you know, we thought it's like a nice gag, like you'll have a few couples saying that they want to be a part of it. And then we had within hours, like hundreds of couples who signed to be a part of this. And the thing is, these are couples, these are people who did not, and I think this is the important thing, because it's more than a declarative part of campaign. I think that bringing these people who are not usually engaged with politics in Israel, who do not see the wedding as a political event, who do not see their private life as a political issue, and people who we've been trying to engage for a long time are now understanding that their very personal life are under threat. And so, you know, we honestly thought there would be just a few couples, and we were shocked and amazed by the amount of people registered. I'll give another quick example, maybe about the municipalities and responsive campaigns that I think do have an incredible impact. So in Israel, we have 256 municipalities. And after going back to Avi Maoz, the same lovely Avi Maoz, who was trying to promote his, I don't know even how to put it, not in a cynical way, his beautiful agendas into the school systems as the mandatory curriculum. And so 170 mayors, okay, 170 out of 256 municipalities signed a letter saying that they will not let these contents be part of their school system. And these were mayors from all across the country who are part of Likud party. They are Likud members. They are very right-wing parties members. They are from the Arab municipalities, from the Druze municipalities. You would see them from all across the country. And this is not something that we've seen before. And the thing is, we initiated a campaign after this letter was published. calling for citizens that their mayors did not sign this letter to write them an email and tell them, this is what we expect you to do. And if you want my vote in October, this is what you need to be battling. This is your fight now. And this is what we expect you as the citizens of this municipality. And again, we thought it would be just a couple of dozen people responding to that. And then within hours, we had hundreds of people writing to their mayors and putting so much pressure on their leaders, saying, this is your time to speak up. We're ashamed that you're not part of this letter. You should be the 171. And we were amazed by the numbers of people that were engaging with that and wrote their mayors the letters. And I think looking at that and looking at what's going on with the judicial reform, people understand that. Let's make it clear, like everything that comes to civil rights in Israel did not arise, did not come from legislation. This is all product of Supreme Court decisions. So discrimination, there is another beautiful legislation that they are promoting, of course, is that you would be able to discriminate who will you want or not to serve in your business. The Supreme Court is the one saying this is discrimination. The Supreme Court is the one saying that gender segregation cannot take place in Israel, and that promoting a legislation that says that should be gender segregation in national parks is illegal. This is the same Supreme Court that thanks to that Supreme Court, gay couples can have babies. And this is not a product of the legislation. This is product of the Supreme Court. And I think that it comes to a point where we say, okay, it's okay if we want to make changes, right? Change is a blessed thing. I think it's good. It says that we're evolving, but it needs to be in a dialogue. And it needs to be with everyone sitting at the table and not just like a blizzard of legislation that no one ever thought that we would see in a democratic country.
Lihi has seen her first blizzards over the past week, so I think the metaphor is particularly apt for her.
That is true.
I actually think, it's maybe we'll come back to this in the question and answer session, but I think, one of the things that we're trying to show is just that part of the role of civil society is to let nothing go unchallenged, right? Nothing, even if our odds of actually completely forestalling it are slim, that actually, like, part of the victory is to make an atrocious thing merely bad, and to make the political powers that are advancing these initiatives expend a great deal of political capital in order to get what they want, by making them waste time and energy. That is part of political opposition, and that is something that civil society can do, even though almost all of them are completely recognized charities, right? This is what organizations can do to demonstrate opposition. I think maybe we'll come back in the Q&A to this idea of, this government is so full of internal tensions that it's very uncertain that it will live to its full term. I mean, which is not saying a lot, because no Israeli government, very rarely has a government lasted from election to election, so it's not a grand sweeping political statement of me to say such a thing. But you already see like a couple ministers quitting their posts. Again, it doesn't matter that much because they have like a bloated cabinet, so what's 2 ministers lost out of 30 or something? But the fact that Avi Maoz came in with very bold intentions and then met all of this intense resistance and found that his agenda is not going to be as easily advanced, nor is the rest of his coalition willing to sort of like spend a bunch of their precious capital for the things that they want to do on his crazy very, very extreme stuff that we're seeing them say, like, no, Avi, you're not going to get everything you want, and he quits in a huff. Like, he hasn't left the government, but like, this is the evidence that some of this is actually working. And then it may feel like a Pyrrhic victory, but these are the dribs and drabs of what impact looks like in these moments. So, when we're looking at other issues in addition to religious freedom, we're thinking about how do we protect rights? How do we legitimize dissent? How do we leave nothing go unchallenged on, say, some of the other issues? This is a lot tougher to talk about after we saw what happened in Huara the past few days, that a mob of settler rioters set fire, killed a couple people, or rather, we're not sure who killed them, but people died. Certainly 100 people, Palestinians in this village, were wounded. That's new, right? We've seen settler violence. It's been on the increase. It's a real thing. It's a fact of life for Palestinians who live in the territories, but to have a whole dozens of settlers go into a village with impunity and commit the violence they committed, that is a new thing. So what can we do about it? One of the things that can and must be done is just that civil society can increase the amount of scrutiny and attention that all of these things get. There's lots of efforts to monitor what happens in the territories, but those can and must be increased. That body cam documentation of, say, police officers is just having evidence of what actually happened is a huge piece. So what is the thinking that's going on at the moment is certainly all the organizations that do the protection of human rights of Palestinians in the territories is how do we increase greatly the number of, say, video cameras that are in the hands of people who live there. What is the presence of observers, of lawyers at protests, even of the press corps, or observers like protectors of the press corps? And then how is that information getting fed back to, say, the media or national decision makers? It's one thing to say, like, well, some nobodies went into this village and made a bunch of trouble, and to say, here's video, here are their faces. There's no reason that you can't go and track them down because we have their, we can see who they are. To greatly ramp that up is actually a concrete ability to not only deter that kind of violence, but also to solve it in the aftermath. And maybe it will or won't happen under this government, but again, it's the intense scrutiny of all of this that is part of one way that you can protect people's lives. And that counts for, say, protests inside of Israel. We're looking at the Bedouin in the village in the Negev, for their unrecognized villages. There's a significant initiative with this government. They want to do what they wanted to do for a long time, which is, move the Bedouin off their small villages and reservationize them into some towns. In many cases, the best thing we can do is to throw up all kinds of procedural roadblocks. Urban planners submit a petition in the urban planning process, or that lawyers take it to some court. And, we're obviously concerned about the loss of the Supreme Court as a tool in all of this. But the Supreme Court is the court of last appeal, at least making the difference between your village gets demolished tomorrow and your village gets demolished at the end of a process 6 months from now, means that we have more time to make a difference. Same thing with monitoring Palestinian protesters, Palestinian citizens of Israel. Will Itamar Ben-Gvir convince the police that they will have impunity to act with increased brutality to, say, Palestinian protesters? Again, the presence of monitoring and watching and accountability that comes from civil society is, again, what's going to encourage to the best that we can to protect people's actual lives. But what are we doing that's also proactive? Like, a lot of this is reactive. In this moment, what we see is a ton of incitement. Look at what Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, these are cabinet ministers, have said in the past week that fueled the Huara pogrom, if you want to call it that. An Israeli general today, one of the commanders of the West Bank, called it a pogrom. So I feel comfortable using that term. A lot of the incitement is coming from the top. But what we know from, say, fighting anti-Semitism here in the diaspora is we know that violent extremists organize online. They find community online, they connect online, and they purposefully go out to confront and enact violence through networks online. And we know that because we have followed Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir and their friends for a decade or more. What is very interesting also is to see, there's a new project, a new initiative, an organization that's been in existence for a few years. It's called Fake Reporter. And it's a bunch of, these like tech wizards from the Israeli high-tech sector who noticed that, well, they have the skills and they have the technical chops to infiltrate those groups, to monitor them, to report them to the authorities, to get them kicked off Facebook and WhatsApp and Twitter and all those things. I think it's actually quite amazing to know that, there were, this is especially like, back last May, when there were, not last May, but May 2020, to know that when there were those extremist groups saying that we're going to go get together, we're going to go to some Arab side of town and we're going to cause some trouble, we're going to go look for a cab driver or whatever in the Jewish end of town, people were there, they saw it, they reported it to the police, that this group of people, their names are X, Y, and Z, and they live in these other places, and they're going to go do it in this side of town, and it's all online, and you can all follow it online, and that, the shekels that say somebody gave $18 to the New Israel Fund of Canada, and that our support for an organization like Fake Reporter actually may have saved somebody's life that night. To prevent that group, they got it closed down, kicked off Twitter, or kicked off WhatsApp. They couldn't coordinate, they got disconnected, and a couple of them were even arrested. Like, that's a significant thing that we can do and that Israelis are doing, and that we know from fighting anti-Semitism here at home, that you have to stop. It's not just an accident that someone had a riot and somebody got killed. These are purposeful things that people want to do. So if we can disrupt them to the greatest extent possible, we can also take out some of the power that politicians like Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich are using to do what they want in an official post if their base, again, is increasingly scrutinized and undermined. Lihi,
Can I?
yeah.
I wanted to give an example talking about Fake Reporter, because I think this is a great example of civil society in Israel today working together. We've been working with Fake Reporter as well. We had, so civil society organizations are under awful attack from either like the groups that Ben was mentioning, a lot of them coming from fake accounts that they're using, and they are basically, I'm just going to be straight up and honest, they were calling us, for example, yeah, I'm talking about Israel Hofsheet. They said that we are traitors, we're Nazis, and we should not exist, and they should, the organization should be illegal. And we had a bunch of fake accounts that were reposting that and promoting that. And so we collaborated with Fake Reporter. We asked them to help us find the people behind these fake accounts. And they helped us, and together we managed to find a specific few people, and we filed a civil lawsuit against them. That was also, it got a lot of attention in the media as well. But the thing is, we sort of pointed out that they need to take responsibility on their actions, on the thing they say, and how the work, they call it the work that they do on social media is fueling so much violence and division in the country. So great guys, fake reporters, and doing amazing job. I think it's super important for all of us in civil society.
And it's just a nice example of how civil society organizations in this moment are like linking together in a way that I think makes the sum greater than the whole of the parts. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Lihi, we have another about 10 minutes that I want to do. Let's talk about the long term, perhaps a little bit more briefly than we normally do, because I still want to save 20 minutes for questions. What I hope we've shown you is some interesting and compelling initiatives of like what civil society's job as another pillar of democracy, a protector of democracy, can accomplish in this moment. But obviously, like success from the opposition has a different definition, and really we're looking at a long-term struggle here. We've been in a long-term struggle, but it's just the point is a little bit, sharper. When it feels this intense. It's going to take us 10, 20, 30 years to really turn the ship around, but I think we would not be doing this work, wouldn't be here. Lihi wouldn't, have, even though she's in Toronto, she wouldn't have come out to Canada if she didn't feel and we didn't feel that there was actually something that we could do. That if we wouldn't be doing this work if we didn't believe that Israel has within it what it's necessary to turn itself around. And it would be nice if it wasn't balanced on the edge of a knife. But balanced on the edge of a knife, even a little breeze might be enough. Just a little bit of extra backwind might be enough to push us over to the other side. So when we look at the long-term work, like what does that actually look like? What does that mean? So like I said, a decade ago, NIF already began investing in some of the sort of missing pieces of the civil society ecosystem, and looking at other sectors and other successful progressive movements and not so progressive movements, trying to figure out like can something be added to Israel that isn't already there? Can we be working together in a way to combat these populist illiberal forces? But I think we would not be content to just like go back to the last government or the two governments ago. Israel was already an imperfect democracy. We can't talk about democracy in Israel and pretend that the occupation is like somehow democratic. Like those things just don't go together. We're looking for an overall long-term improvement. We're looking for a light unto the nations. And we can talk about good successes and good progress that we had over the Israel's early years, but ultimately we're talking about democracy and equality for everybody. So when we look at that in this moment, what are we actually doing? There's two big pieces of this that I think are really important, and they're rooted in the now, but they have consequences for the long term. And it's the two big ones are protecting Jewish-Arab political partnership and a strengthening of the pro-democracy camp. Those are the two big ones. When you look at protecting Jewish-Arab political partnership, you look at partly what fueled this government into power is sort of like the racist backlash against the election of the US's first black president. The last government was a proof in concept that an alternative vision for Israel is possible, a more pluralistic vision, a more inclusive vision, with the act of including Israel's first Arab political party in the government. There was proof that it's possible, and just think, before that government came to be, would you have imagined that it would have even happened? I think we were talking about it at the time as if like maybe it'll happen in the next decade, but it happened last year. And if we look back at some of the work that civil society did over the past 5 elections ago, public support for Jewish-Arab political partnership was somewhere around 30%. But then our groups did work and made the cases that actually there's something, there's an opportunity that's being missed here, that we're working on it in all kinds of ways. And in the next elections, it went up. Each election, it went up to somewhere around 40. And by the the election before this the change government, with all its imperfections, the change government, it crossed the 50% threshold. That's a huge change in Israeli society that a year ago, we didn't even imagine it was possible, but that a majority of Israelis were willing to consider it and give it a shot. And in this election, unless you were voting for the right wing, you were implicitly voting for more Jewish-Arab political partnership. Like, again, this was a 50-50 election. It was like 49.5% versus 49.5% of the actual like popular vote. This government and these forces see Jewish-Arab political partnership as their biggest threat, which is why you hear them talking about, changing the election laws so they can kick out the Arab parties, or at least enough of the Arab parties, so that there could be no meaningful opposition bloc. That is why now, as we're doing our short-term work, we have to be in solidarity with our Palestinian citizens. We have to demonstrate, say in the demonstrations, that we're taking their issues seriously and that we're there for them and that we will support them and that we will spend political capital to make sure that their views and their needs are included in this wider conversation about democracy. When we're building leaders, that's piece number one. I won't dwell on that, Lihi, because I know I asked myself to be brief. But the second piece of this is closely related because we're looking at investing in new leaders, new models, and new initiatives, like new organizations. Like Israel Hofsheet didn't exist a decade ago. How great is it now to have all the work they did with mayor's letters and with some of the other stuff? But we look at other new institutions that were missing before, things like liberal think tanks were not a thing in Israel a decade ago, and we've made a point of seeding so many of them, and there's even more that have founded themselves in the past few years. Just a few years ago, there wasn't any grassroots joint Jewish-Arab organizing happening in Israel on things like there's potholes in your streets and there's like no playground in your neighborhood. That I'm sure many people have heard of, maybe you've heard of Omdim B'Yachad or Zazim. Again, these joint Jewish-Arab grassroots groups that have chapters all over the country, they look a lot like Israel Hofsheet, but they're purposefully Jewish-Arab and they deal with lots of kinds of issues, the environment or crime or what have you, but that those didn't exist as a political force in Israel, as a grassroots base. And those are just examples of new institutions or the production of new ideas that political leaders rely on for all the research and the alternative proposals. You have to be able to demonstrate a credible alternative if you want to get elected. And you often have to do it from the opposition. So these things matter, but again, to go back to the first piece, all of these things are interwoven. It doesn't make sense to cultivate a bunch of new young leaders and to get organizations to work together if the Arab citizens are left out of it. Part of what we saw in the last government was that they hadn't, the change government, they hadn't quite figured out the coinage of exchange that would keep them together. Avigdor Lieberman was a pillar in his party of like predominantly secular Russian voters, was a pillar of some of the Netanyahu's previous governments. They are avowedly secular and they really do not like the Haredi, but they sat in government with them for a decade because they figured out an exchange that worked for both of them. It's easy to see them as like a block. But they're also a mix of strange bedfellows. And if we have strange bedfellows too, we can figure out ways to work together. And it will not happen without the inclusion of Arab leaders, civil society leaders, politicians, citizens. That's part of just what Israeli democracy should be anyway, is an inclusion of everyone. Lihi, if you're able to be as brief as I wasn't. When you look at the long term, when Israel Hofsheet is working on the long term in religious freedom, what are you looking at and what are you trying to work on?
So I think generally speaking, first of all, when you talk about looking at the long term, it's not just looking, it's saying, okay, if we want to look to see ourselves in a certain place within 10 years, we need to set the milestones for this entire way. So where do we want to see ourselves within 7 years and 5 years and 3 years and so on? I think I will add to what you said about leadership. A lot of our work and a big part of, I think, the sort of infrastructure that civil society is working on is this leadership. For example, we have a program training training parliamentary advisors, okay, and then help them to get jobs within the Knesset, municipalities, within the government. Here's the thing, for me as an organization, the success of this program is not just that they got a job and now they're influencing whatever they are. These young people would be the next members of Knesset. These young people would be the next mayors in Israel. These young people is the leadership that we want to see. And if we want to see them in these positions within 10 years, we need to make this investment now. We need to plant these seeds now if we want to see those flowers blossom within 10 years. Another training that we do, for example, is for liberal council members. And I think it works on the same idea. Another example, I think that looking at the long term, and I think it's very important to understand as a strategy for civil society organizations. Let's take, for example, civil marriage. Okay, so civil marriage do not exist in Israel today. And we understand that this is something that will not happen through legislation in the near future or so.
We taught Lihi a new English phrase, dead on arrival.
Because I'm trying to stay optimistic. You're not helping me. Okay. So it's one thing to say we understand that it will not happen through legislation, but it doesn't mean that we need to say, okay, so we're giving up on civil marriage, right? So what we did, we have Havaya. I was talking about the Israeli Life Cycle Ceremonies Center, and we're marrying hundreds of couples every year. And these couples are also have legal consultation that they afterwards they sign a sort of an affidavit for common law marriage, and they get an ID card. This ID card is now, okay, 2023, is recognized by the Ministry of Housing, so that a couple that did not marry through the Rabbanut, but did come to Havaya to marry and have this ID, would get equal rights, okay, from the Ministry of Housing, just as a couple who married through the Rabbanut, including gay couples, okay? My partner and I, we both registered for the Ministry of Housing benefits, and it's thanks to the Havaya ID card that we have that we're entitled to that. We have this, I call it a privilege, but it's all depends on the perspective. We have insurance companies and banks that are now recognizing this ID card as valid, and you know, it increasing, and it would come to a point where the government would not be able no longer to ignore that, because if the companies are recognizing it and the banks are recognizing it, and several ministries and municipalities are recognizing it, there is no choice. If there's an actual form of civil marriage in Israel, so you do need to make it work. You do need to create a system that is not, you know, going like that. This is a very Israeli thing to do, right? That way. No, there's a right way to do things. So, so let's do it that way.
Wait, Lihi, let's save more for. I want to make sure that we do have time still for Q&A. So Maytal's going to begin looking at our board member who we've not introduced yet, but Maytal Kowalski back here is going to help us look at get some Zoom questions. But while she's doing that, I wanted us to take one quick moment. There are some cards on your chairs. Look, this is a fascinating moment in Israel where we're talking about what's the short-term difference we can make, what's the long-term difference that we can make. And part of what we are seeing in Israel is all these people coming off the fence and getting involved for the first time. And that's also happening in the diaspora. You look at all these Jewish institutions that have not said anything, beginning to say things, and people who are maybe, haven't put Israel at the top of their feed in a long time are suddenly seeing it enter their world, and they're really curious and they want to. But we know from lots of other issues that just because there is, say, popular support for a thing, it doesn't mean that anything will change. What is necessary is for people who care about something to get connected and plugged in, to be given opportunities to do things. And so, look, I have my agenda. I'd love you guys to give a shekel to the New Israel Fund. It would be really great for us. But I'm actually not asking you to do that tonight. I'm actually asking you to do something that would help us just build the movement a little bit. Right now, there are people who are encountering these issues for the first time, or maybe they care a lot, but they are just not plugged in. Will you just take a few minutes to help us plug them in? We've given you a little URL that's nifcan.org/sign, and it leads to a petition that people can sign saying that they're a religious lefty. And it's a really lovely little mirror of an event that happened in Israel. Look, we're in a synagogue. I don't know how many of you would consider yourselves religious or progressive or willing to call yourself a religious lefty. I don't know. But in Israel, it's not easy to be a religious person who's lefty, because in religious circles, you're a weirdo because you're lefty, and in lefty circles, you're a weirdo because you're religious. But in the past few weeks, a month ago, we saw an incredible thing. It was a bunch of religious lefties said, well, we feel a little bit alone and isolated, but you know what? We're going to do something. We can't stand in this moment to just let this stuff happen, especially when religious extremism is so much a part of what we're seeing. So we're going to hold a conference of religious lefties, and they held a conference of religious lefties. They thought a couple hundred people would come. 1,000 Israelis came. Haredi, Orthodox, meaning ultra-Orthodox, Orthodox, Reform, Masorti, you name it, they were there. People who knew each other, who were like, I didn't know that you were also in this group too, me too. Like, that's a really beautiful thing. We're just asking, why don't you join them? Sign it. It would be lovely if you sign it, but really I want you to find 3 people that you might send it to. Or find some other way to broach the conversation with them, get them connected to. Look, it could be New Israel Fund, it could be Amenu, it could be Canadian Friends of Peace Now. There's a lot of groups that are doing this work, but point is, help us out just a little bit. And if you've done that, and I don't know if you can think of anybody, look, when was the last time you talked to your MP about Israel? I'm willing to bet they have a really stereotypical view of what Jews think about Israel. And I think they are probably not clued into the huge changes in the Jewish community, given this government. There's other things you can do too. I can find them on our website. But I didn't want to move to Q&A without saying there are things you can do. There are lots of things that you can do. And if you've done one of them, do another one. If you've done 2, do 3. This is a moment where we're all kind of asking, have we done enough? And I'm just asking you to ask yourself, would you do 2 of these things? Would you do 3 of them? With that, Lihi, I want to go to questions, and then I know that we don't have all the time in the world, but don't worry, questions that we leave unanswered, we'll get to go downstairs and talk about it over. There's wine down there, coffee, whatever you want. Maytal.
Yeah, okay, so there's actually, I think, a pretty easy question to answer, which is...
I'm going to take a bunch of questions, all the online ones, and then a bunch in person, and we'll see what we get to.
Okay, great. Do you know how many mayors changed their positions as a result of the letter writing campaign, or is it too early to tell?
Did you catch that one, Lihi?
I also see, Hannah, you mentioned that there's a question from Miriam on Zoom. Yeah, great. You can unmute and ask your question.
Am I unmuted?
Yep.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi. Did you want me to ask now, or were you going to answer the first?
Please ask.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wrote this in the chat, and I'm not sure I can say it the same way, but in some of the articles I've been reading in Haaretz, etc., people are worried because it seems like the current administration is deliberately provoking an escalation of Palestinian violence. They're also directing a lot of attention to the threat from Iran, and that this is how they're trying to kind of distract everybody from the internal division between Israelis over this new administration and get everybody to unite in the face of the common threat or the common threat or the common enemy. And you know, some people who write these articles seem to be thinking that they're going to do this quite successfully. So what do you think about that?
Great, thanks, Miriam. Let's take some more.
I don't have anything else in the chat, if there's anything in person.
Okay, if you have a question, raise your hand. Anybody want to ask? It could be, it's not the time for extended statements on your philosophy on the moment, but questions for clarity also are welcomed at this time. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. Go ahead and ask your question. I'll repeat it back so Lihi can hear it.
First, I want to make a statement and a question with confidence.
Can it be a short statement, just in the interest of time?
Very short.
Great, thank you.
The way the situation has developed is understandable. As long as as long as Israelis, both left and right, started to say, the Arabs, they just want to kill us. And that okays everything. As long as you could keep believing that they want to kill us. And that was a tone that was set a long time ago. And so a country that started out woke or left wing or whatever you want to call it, became more right and more right out of fear. I don't know whether what you're trying to do is going to change that rhetoric. That's what needs to change. I can say only one, so my question is, how can you actually change that rhetoric? Because that is the most important issue. And along with that, now I forgot what I was going to say.
That's a great question.
Okay.
That's a great
I think
contribution.
I'll
Thank
just
you.
leave it at that. Oh, I know what the other part of this is. There was a time when Palestinians or Arabs mingled a lot with Israelis. Today, they are so cut off, many Israelis never see a Palestinian. They don't even know what a Palestinian, or even an Arab, let's say, you know. And this is a serious problem.
Mm-hmm.
And how can that be changed?
Mm-hmm. I saw there was this right here in the front row.
Hi. I wonder, how do you respond to the idea that the demographic trends in Israel are not in favor of the secular left movements, and how that will impact the future of the country?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. David, do you mind if I skip you and go to this gentleman over here, Sam?
Lihi very pointedly talked about her mother and father, one lefty Ashkenazi, the other Mizrahi right. And it seems to me that division is very real. How much of the issues today is not left-wing, right-wing, but it's really a racial and ethnic divide between Ashkenazim and Mizrahim.
Sure. David, last question, and then did I really miss anybody over here? I think we have
just
certainly enough to
just-
talk about.
I just want to know if you can speak to the seeds that are being planted in terms of liberal think tanks.
Oh, sure.
Thanks.
Okay, so we have quite a bit. We obviously aren't going to get to everything. And I welcome your longer extended statements over coffee and wine downstairs. That's where I want to hear those. Lihi was, so just to sort of, I think you heard everything, but there was one particular question about like how many mayors responded after the pressure you generated. We have questions about the escalation of violence. How do you confront fear? How do you build better relations between Israeli Jews and Palestinians of all kinds? What's the role of the Ashkenazi-Sephardi divide in the wider politics? And what's happening about new thinking in the country, liberal think tanks? So obviously the mayor's one is for you, but if there's anything else about that that you want to comment on, now is the time.
Okay. So I'll say about the mayors that there were more and more letters coming after that, and more issues that were required to respond. And then we saw mayors that did not sign the first letter that came out did respond afterwards, and some of them also were vocal on social media regarding to that, because they understood that their constituents want them to be vocal about it. So yeah, we definitely saw the change happening pretty fast, I have to say, which is amazing. I think there is, it's not answering a specific question. I think it sort of answer a few of them together in a way. We need to understand that many people within who did vote for this coalition, who did vote for right-wing parties, are now standing up and saying, this is not what we voted for. This is not what we wanted you to do. This is not what you talked about during campaign. I think it was very, I don't want to underestimate, but it was very easy to say, yes, we will give you national security. And of course, who doesn't want national security? No one says what it actually means, right? They just say that this is what they would promote. And so people are fueled for years and years with fear. So yeah, if you're trying to like prioritize what you're voting on, so yeah, of course you want national security. But then now they understand that it comes as a whole package, that these people who promise this national security, which obviously they don't have any, never mind, won't get into that. It's hard to stay brief on that one. But are also, this whole package comes with not just racist, but also chauvinist and homophobe and misogynic people, and who are promoting legislation that will hurt the very core, the very liberal and democratic core of Israel. And I think that a lot of people who did vote for this coalition, not just I think, yeah, we see it in researches and polls that we do. We did a few actually after the elections and before the elections and a few months later. You see that very clearly, that many of them are saying, we did vote for a right-wing party, but this is not what we signed up for. This is not the plan that we wanted. And I think a part of this is also answering the question about Ashkenazi and Mizrahi. I think that a lot of the tags, the labels that we're trying to put on a lot of things is a discourse that someone decided that this is the discourse we will have. Someone decided that this is how we will manage this conversation. And in these terms, this is our responsibility now to change this discourse and put the focus of the Israeli society and the Jewish people on what can be done, what can be achieved, what we do want to see here, and not the division of basically everything. Just yeah, I think I'll stop here so you will have some time to.
No, I was just thinking about the escalation of violence. How do you confront fear? What are the greater ethnic and sub-ethnic divides in this? And I think what Lihi is saying is the big answer. I think often we're accustomed to thinking about this in terms of the left and the progressive camp, but actually we're seeing in the moment the crystallization of the pro-democracy camp. And in the last election, you could arguably say the pro-democracy camp like voted for its, was 50% of the country. But the other, the voters of the current government, they didn't necessarily know they were voting for this. They didn't know that they were voting for a bunch of a further encroachment of religious extremism into their private lives. It was sort of like, fine if the Haredim are over there, the ultra-Orthodox are over there doing their thing, but you can't gender segregate like my kid's school or their university classrooms or our town square. If you're gonna empty out the treasury and give loads more money away to this, that, and the other, if you're going to promise me national security, but actually you're doing all of these things which are like openly destabilizing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and increasing violence, and you're not doing anything to de-escalate. That's why we see this government does not at all want to go to elections, because it's lost a major chunk of its support. There were, every couple of weeks there's another poll that shows the government, these parties, including Likud, have lost more support. The largest party, if there were elections today, would be Yesh Atid. It would replace, like, sort of swap places with the Likud, and then some of the right-wing parties would see an erosion of their support also. Their internal divisions, we have to be honest, their internal divisions is what will pull them apart. But there has been a broad and increasing awareness that the stakes are actually all kinds of stuff. Whether it's the Ashkenazi Sephardi divide, that those issues will not get resolved under this government and they will be made worse as well. That if it's about escalation of violence, that this government is increasing the violence by its impunity for settlers and other things. So that's why this moment is so crucial for us to do something. We need to support the pro-democracy camp, and that means sitting with some unusual bedfellows. It means very surprising and beautiful partnerships. And I think I'd like to save any other further conversation for downstairs. I want to wrap up and just thank you for having this conversation with me. I want to invite Polly back up to close things out, but I just really thank you for sticking with us as long as you have. It's been a long conversation, and I hope it will be longer downstairs. So thanks for sticking with us. Polly?
Ben and Lihi, thank you both so much for speaking with us today and for being here virtually and in person in Vancouver. I'm really grateful that I was able to stop by on my way to Ottawa, where I will be serving as an NIFC fellow in the Ottawa area. And thank you all, the Shalom community, for your great questions. Really interesting, and I think that advanced the conversation. I do hope you all will go downstairs after, because I think there's a lot more to discuss. Ben and Lihi, I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone, or at least I hope I am, when I say I'm deeply motivated by your work and by your commitment to Israel, by the work of your organizations and commitment to advancing democracy and human rights in Israel. You both managed to vividly share very hard realities while keeping me hopeful for the future. I hope that that's the sentiment that most of you are leaving with as well. If learning about this view of Israel has inspired you today, then I have a suggestion for you. You could join Ben and Lihi in Israel on NIFC's study tour from May 8th to 15th of this year, so coming up. And incidentally, I will also be there the same week for my half-siblings, B'nai Mitzvot, 2 of them, boy-girl twins, and I hope to join the group for a couple of meals or activities. And during this life-changing trip, should you go on it, you would spend 8 days immersed in the most complex and difficult issues affecting Israeli society, while learning from dozens of Israeli activists like Lihi in the very places where they do their work. Last month, I myself spent 2 weeks in Israel, Palestine as part of the Noemi Chazan Fellowship Tour, along with other young people from the US, the UK, and Australia. And I can attest firsthand that the experience is invaluable. Imagine learning about the fight for infrastructure, for example, in unrecognized Bedouin villages, in those very villages, from Bedouin and Jewish leaders fighting for Bedouin equality. Imagine learning about the struggle for religious freedom from secular and ultra-Orthodox feminists in dialogue with one another. Imagine learning about the quest to end the occupation from both Jewish and Palestinian human rights defenders in the West Bank. And imagine an entire week spent understanding the people in Israel who are building and growing a movement to protect and advance democracy and equality for all who live there. If this sounds like something you want to do, then come talk to us, and quick, because registration closes March 1st. Yeah. How quick? Is there a grace period? Yeah. Yeah, talk to Ben to negotiate an extension. So if this sounds like something you want to do, please don't be shy. And thank you again to Or Shalom for hosting us today, and again to the co-sponsoring partners, Canadian Friends of Peace and Menu Canada. Please join us for light refreshments and more discussion downstairs. Thank you all again.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Just want to add special thanks to Lauren Mallon for manning our camera and to Sally Thorne, our Zoom Shamash. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.